Okay. And then are we already screen shared?
Not yet. So.
Okay. Oh wait. We'll have our.
Sure.
You wanna?
Sure.
Yeah. Cool. Okay.
All right, everyone. I think everyone's here.
Yeah. So before we get into the topic of monitoring and evaluation and how to pick indicators and introducing an M&E plan matrix, we have more technical scheduling things to chat about.
Yeah. So for the week of March, the Wednesday would be March 8th. So not this next week, but the one after that. Just wanted to see if you all are possibly available to switch that date from the 8th Wednesday to Monday, the 6th, at the same time. What do you think? Okay. Tia and Pete say that's okay. Brad says okay. Timothy, do you know what your schedule would be like on Monday, if you'd be available on the 6th instead of the 8th or not?
I will not be available on Monday.
You will not.
Not.
But that's okay. I can watch the recorded chat section.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, this is just to gauge like feasibility. How about you guys? Monday instead of Okay.
Okay, we'll confirm the change with you guys over email and send out details for that. Cool. Okay. So let me share the screen. Okay, and can you guys see this, my screen? Yeah, we're recording. Small, so I won't be able to see your videos though. Does this look like a regular presentation, or does it look like a presenter view presentation to you guys remotely?
Presenter view.
Okay. Okay. I'm just gonna try it. Yeah, I was like, not that. I mean, you guys have this presentation in SmartSite anyway, but. Okay, hold on. I'm gonna stop the share for a second. Slideshow. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Oh, what is
That is.
okay. Oh.
Sorry, guys.
What's the bottom, like next to notes? You have to click a different one, like where?
Oh, I think that just makes it look better. Oh.
Okay, slideshow. Okay.
Okay, there we go.
Oh, okay, sorry about that, guys. I will not share that. No, it's fine. All right. Hopefully this one, you guys can see it like a regular presentation. Right.
Okay.
Now I know how to do it. Okay. Voila. Okay. M&E part 2. Choosing indicators and designing an M&E plan. So before I get straight into it, do you guys have any questions kind of from last time, or given the other topics that we talked about in between that you want to chat about before we dive in? Or feel free to ask questions also as we go along. I don't hear any questions, so I'll continue. Okay, so reviewing from last time. Okay. I want to make this go away. Move it to the bottom. So again, defining monitoring and evaluation. Monitoring is asking the question, are we doing things right? It's a routine assessment of the information or indicators, which we'll talk about more, of a project's ongoing activities that tracks progress towards your objectives and goals, and identify areas that are working well and those that need improvement, and is really used for adaptively managing a project. Whereas evaluation asks the question, are we doing the right thing? Evaluating with that monitoring data whether or not this is the correct thing to be doing or if things need to change. If you're basically asking the question, is your theory of change correct? Are those hypotheses that link one precondition to the next precondition to your eventual outcome making sense, or is there a breakdown in that theory of change? And so last time we talked much more explicitly about a theory of change and how we can use that as a foundation for creating an M&E plan. So this will go more into like the nitty-gritty of picking indicators and what makes a good indicator and all of that jazz, and then eventually filling out an M&E plan. Okay, so this is just kind of an overview. Sorry, this thing is like really terrible. Okay. Okay, so this is mostly just an overview of the project cycle and where monitoring and evaluation fits in. We are mostly at this like M&E planning stage, and your organizations have, in theory at least, already like done the needs assessment and developed and designed the project. So now, and they should have come up with in their initial proposal kind of a draft of their M&E plan that we're now like gonna start like refining and revising and making into like a concrete actionable thing that's useful. So we're kind of here in this like end of the project planning stage about to go into implementation. But overall, like M&E should kind of take place throughout, and it's a repetitive cycle, as you can clearly see from this nice diagram, that is iterative. Adaptive management is often used. What you come up with in your initial M&E plan should never actually be set in stone. You should always be thinking about revising it and making sure that's working for you always. And yeah, working to improve the program always. Okay, so how to measure progress and impact of the project? You use indicators. Basically, it's like, how do you tell where in that period of change you are? Are you still in the activities phase, and how are those going? Those are typically progress indicators. And then as you move through that theory of change to your different preconditions or different initial outputs to early outcomes to later outcomes to your eventual impact or goal, how do you tell where you are and whether or not that theory of change is following along like you thought it would, or if things are breaking down? So an indicator really is a measure, and you want it to be a measure of just one aspect. You don't want an indicator that can indicate a bunch of different things, because then it gets confusing. Like, what is this indicator telling me? You want it to measure one aspect of an activity, project, or program, and you want it to be directly related to your goals and objectives. You don't want to have an indicator that is irrelevant, because then it doesn't provide you useful information. So like I said, there's kind of two general categories of indicators. There's progress indicators that are typically used in monitoring, and they kind of tell you where in the progress of the project you are. if you had a goal of training 100 people, it can tell you like, okay, we've trained 50 people, so we're halfway there. Or the number of vaccines you've distributed and where that lies in relation to the number that you want to distribute, stuff like that. And like it says, these usually feed into your activities and outputs. There's also impact indicators, and these tell you whether or not intervention has had the intended effect that you want to have. So like I said, it tells you kind of where along in that theory of change you are and how things are working in that sense, and whether you need to change. So indicators should be, there's this nice acronym called SMART, and it stands for specific. So like I said before, you don't want an indicator that is vague, could be pointing towards a bunch of different things. You want it to be measuring a very specific quality or aspect that is also, a very specific quality or aspect, and that provides information that is easily used to make decisions on. You want the indicator to be measurable, and it seems kind of silly to say. Of course, if an indicator is a measure, you definitely want it to be measurable, but there are lots of things that you can think of as indicators of progress that aren't easily measurable. And I would actually say, like, vague concepts like quality of life that could be subjective. People are trying to measure them, but they're very hard to measure, and there aren't really good standards. And so you want to make sure that the tool that you're using, or the indicator that you're using, can be measured in a useful way that's not going to take up a ton of resources or, again, be vague. You also want it to be attainable / affordable. You want this to be something that, given the resources that you have, you can actually do. So if your staff picks an indicator, but no one knows how to adequately administer that survey or run that test or analyze the data that results, then it's not attainable. Or if people know how to do that, but you don't have enough money to spend or time to spend collecting that information and analyzing that information, then it's not affordable or attainable in that sense. So you want to make sure that it's something that you could actually do. You also want it to be relevant. So again, directly related to your outcomes, objectives, goals. You don't want it to be superfluous. I can't get over it. You don't want it to be unrelated to what you're actually doing, because then it wastes time, money, other resources, and ends up just kind of like sitting either in filing cabinets or on computers. And nothing gets done with it. And oftentimes collecting this information is also really demanding of your participants, and you don't want to be wasting their time. Their time is valuable to them also, and so if you are collecting something that's not relevant, it also hurts the people that you're trying to help. And you also, lastly, want it to be timely. You want this information to be actionable and to use it almost in real time for the most part. So you don't want to pick an indicator that you're going to base a decision on that you'll only get results from a year after the project's over. Because if you need to make a decision on it, then you're on hold for a year or something like that. You want it to be able to be collected in a timely manner so that you can make actionable decisions on it. So the question with that also becomes, impacts are oftentimes long-term and don't necessarily fall within a nice project time frame. So those are things that we should keep in mind, and maybe those long-term impact indicators aren't appropriate for a 6-month project and should be something that maybe you could suggest to the organization as something that they can look into in the future, but you don't want to pick them for this project specifically. So again, you want all your information to contribute directly to tangible, actionable learning. Okay. Otherwise, don't collect it. And it's also a really good idea to test whatever methods or tools that you are thinking of using beforehand to make sure that they work the way that you think they'll work in the situation that you have. Questions? So far? No? Okay, so indicators can be quantitative or qualitative, but again, they must be measurable. So they could be number of farmers, or percent change in yield, or prevalence of pests in the field, or like soil fertility levels, or percent loss in post-harvest, stuff like that. They could be like changes in knowledge and things like that. They can be direct indicators, so like you're directly counting the number of people that attend your training, or they could be proxy indicators because maybe the direct indicator is hard to measure or too expensive or not timely, or for whatever reason, the direct indicator isn't available to you, so you could use proxy indicators. So the example up here is the direct measure is to measure effectiveness of the health program, and you could say, okay, child mortality rates, those are direct measures, but we don't have the ability to measure that because we're only working with 100 people, and mortality rates are like population scale indicators. So we're gonna instead measure the percent of births attended by like a trained health personnel, because we think that's linked to this more direct indicator of child mortality rates. And again, so you can also, you don't always have to be collecting indicators yourselves. You can also get information from secondary sources. So perhaps you do want to get that direct child mortality rate indicator, but you can get it from government sources as opposed to trying to collect that yourself. Okay, indicators are not simply anything you can think of. Again, they need to be relevant, they need to be measurable, they need to be attainable and affordable. So there's a ton of things that we can think of asking, a ton of questions we can think of asking, a ton of things we can think of measuring, but they're not going to be, not all of them are going to be useful and what we want to be putting our time and effort towards. Indicators shouldn't be confused with goals and objectives. They're specifically a measure. So the goal could be that we train 100 people on pest management, but the indicator is not 100 people are trained in pest management. The indicator is simply number of people trained. If that makes sense, that distinction. Yeah, so, and you don't want to collect, again, things that don't have an explicit purpose. You want every piece of information that you're collecting have some sort of workflow. You want to know like who's collecting this and where is it going and what are the actions that are going to be taken with this information once we have it. So that's why I like this little cartoon. I've actually been a part of a survey of farmers like this where the designer was just like, we'll just ask everything that we can think of and see what happens, like, and see what comes. And it was like really hard to analyze that data because there were tons of gaps in the information, as well as like a ton of superfluous. Okay, superfluous. There's a ton of information that like wasn't useful or like, and so it was a huge mess. And then also potentially a waste of time for both us and the people that we ask those questions to. So you don't want to have that be the case. So how to choose indicators. So this kind of I want us to think back to M&E Part 1 a few weeks ago, where we talked about theory of change. You want to pay attention to those implicit assumptions and consider if there are ways to measure the progression along your theory of change. So if we train 100 people on like how to reduce post-harvest loss through improved like harvesting methods, how do we know that that then leads to reduced post-harvest loss? And what indicator, so there's an assumption there that we've trained them and that they'll adopt it and that then that'll improve post-harvest quality. So what are the things that are implicit assumptions and how do we measure and make sure that we're progressing from training to reduce post-harvest loss? And then other things to consider, in addition to making sure that you're flowing along your theory of change in the way that you thought you would, and learning and improving and adaptively managing to make sure that things go as successfully as possible, are donor requirements. So we actually have donor requirements. I put up on the SMART site the final report that we asked all of our organizations to fill out. So that's kind of for your guys' information. You'll know what we're asking the organizations to report on. It's not super onerous. It's mostly like counts delineated by gender. That isn't always great, but we are also asked by USAID to report these things. So the information that the organizations report to us gets filtered up to USAID, who's asking us for this information as well. So donor requirements are something to take into account. Again, availability of resources. What are the resources available at this organization with these funds? Because those could potentially be limiting factors in what you pick as indicators. And you definitely want to, again, I'm stressing this, but make sure that the information you're collecting has a direct purpose or use for the project. Because this is oftentimes not the case, sadly. Okay, so these are just examples of how to transfer from like a goal, an outcome, or output to the indicator that is used. Let me move this a little bit. So in this example, the goal is around primary school education. So we want a 10% increase in the number of grade 6 primary students continuing on to high school within 3 years. So the indicator is the percentage of grades 5 to 6 primary students continuing on to high school. So again, there's that distinction. The goal has like numbers associated with it, like some sort of threshold or some sort of amount, but the indicator is just the actual measure that you're going to use to assess whether or not you're achieving that goal. So again, outcome, improve reading proficiency, and then the indicator is average reading proficiency, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is an example that I actually did for one of our projects. It is by no means perfect and could definitely be improved, but this is what I made for our project that's in Guatemala called Mas Riego, More Irrigation. And it's about promoting conservation agriculture and drip irrigation for smallholder farmers in Guatemala. So the like green / on my screen it looks blue boxes are what I made as the theory of change, and then underneath I kind of brainstormed what the like associate M&E steps were for this. So the project is mainly going to be doing education, training, and technical support for drip irrigation, conservation agriculture, and rainwater harvesting. So I outlined some progress indicators, which are, again, number of people trained, there was a focus on number of households with children under 5 being served. So that's another one to track. And then there was like just the number of trainings provided per topic. And then you'd also have training evaluations. So that's like the change in knowledge. That's a little bit more on the impact side. So the first 3 bullets are more progress indicators, whereas the last one's more like an impact indicator, assessing changes in knowledge. And then also there's this component of increasing access to credit so people could purchase drip irrigation kits, and then like use the money that they get from potentially increasing their yields to pay that back eventually. So then there's like a baseline of, if you're trying to increase access to credit, you should get a baseline of what people's current access to credit is, so you know how that changes through the course of the project. So from there, there's increased use of these 3 technologies and practices. They will have the effects of decreasing labor requirements and increasing horticultural production, so yield. So again, these are more like baseline like questions that I came up with. But you can see, so for the point that's like decreased labor requirements, an indicator could be like current, like how many hours per person per day is spent cropping, like is spent on producing food. So that's the indicator, and then we have a baseline getting the current hours used, and then we'll do a midline or end line, and again ask like what are the hours being spent afterwards, and was there a decrease in that? And then, so yeah, so you can kind of peruse this more on your own and kind of see, again, this is definitely not perfect. It could be revised, but I think it's a good example of kind of going through a theory of change and then kind of associating indicators and questions with those components. Any questions so far? Everyone's following along. Sorry, I think I'm talking too fast. Okay, so data collection. This is also by no means an exhaustive list of how you can collect data, but there's several more ways. But so you could do surveys, you could do individual or household surveys, you could do them in person or with paper or with electronics. You could even do like text surveys where you like text people questions and try and get responses that way. When you do surveys, it's important to think about your sampling method and how that might impact like how you analyze the results afterwards, or like what conclusions you can draw. You could do interviews. Oftentimes we see people refer to key informant interviews. So if you're working with a farmer group, I think oftentimes people tend to interview like the lead farmer and get their like thoughts and perceptions on how the program's going, or what their practices are and how they've changed as a result of trainings or involvement in the program. Key informant interviews are oftentimes used at the beginning to kind of get a sense of the situation in a community. So it's kind of like a baseline of where things are at. And then you can go back to those people afterwards and also to get a kind of a post idea of what's happening. You could do guided focus groups with a bunch of people and have like, more of a group conversation about a topic or topics. I did a bunch of focus groups in South Africa a couple years ago about food security and how people cope with not having enough food or money to buy food. And so we kind of like brainstormed like what are the things that people would do in a situation if they didn't have food or money to buy food, and we'd like brainstorm the list, and then also came up with kind of like a seasonal map of when different strategies were used or like would be used throughout the year. One thing to keep in mind when you're doing any of these things is the sensitivity of the topics that you're talking about, and being aware of how asking these questions affects the person you're interviewing or surveying, and also like the setting in which you're in. And a lot of the times these surveys and interview questions and guided focus group questions and protocols are developed in English and then translated into the local language. So you want to be really thoughtful when you're doing that translation, that your meaning doesn't get lost or altered in some way. This is also something to keep in mind when you're just out talking to farmers kind of more casually, but with an interpreter. You should have like a really good rapport with your interpreter and make sure that they have the vocabulary, because oftentimes you're using very technical words. So you want to make sure they have the vocabulary to explain like soil pH or humidity and all these more technical concepts and things like that. So you could also just do field observations. So you can just go and like sit and watch like either a town hall. I mean, it depends on what you're looking for, but you could, observe a farmer working in their field for a day and how they plant or harvest, or how they just go and observe how people store their food and what conditions there are. So you could just visually observe, or you could also like take temperature measurements, or you could take soil like samples and test them. There's a lot of different ways, especially, and I think I underplayed this because I have a little bit more of a bent towards like social things, but when you're working on a very like scientific technical project, any sorts of like experiments or protocols are also ways. I mean, anything that you can think of as research is oftentimes the same sorts of things that you could apply to monitoring and evaluation data collection methods. There's also logbooks and like project documents, so information is being collected, or at least hopefully is being collected like throughout the project. So like a sign-in sheet, or maybe like someone's just taking pictures on the website of like a training, but you could use that as like data to see like, okay, there was like a mix of men and women at this training, and they all like looked really engaged in the training. They're all leaning in. You can see it from the picture. Everyone looks like really happy. Or maybe this training didn't look so well because you can tell a bunch of people are like staring off in other directions, not paying attention. You could use it kind of as like an analysis tool. And then there's also participatory methods where you are involving people. Here it's under data collection, but you can really involve the people that are beneficiaries of the project into kind of all stages of monitoring and evaluation. And ideally that is the case, although it can take a lot of time, and you guys are also all remote. So it's hard for you to engage with those people when you're coming up with indicators and things, which is why hopefully you can be in contact with your organization, and your organization is in contact with the beneficiaries, and the organization can kind of maybe serve as an intermediary in that sense. But yeah, engaging people and saying, okay, like, this is what we think's happening. What do you think's happening? What do you think should be measured? And kind of seeing them less as just purely beneficiaries of the project and seeing them more as like collaborators in the project. I know there's lots of talk about citizen science, so I think this is in a way kind of like citizen science, where people are who don't have the traditional training or expertise are still being involved and seen as experts in their, because they are experts in their own lives and the way that they are doing things. And so, yeah, deserve to be involved in that whole process. Okay, so I've talked a lot about indicators and different ways of collecting them, but the ultimate goal is to come up with a plan. So this is one example. There's, as it says on the slide, many different templates and matrices for doing this, and this is just one of them that I have adapted from a Tools for Development, Tools for Dev template. I've added a couple more columns than they have. There's also on the Smart site already a CRS manual that has another template and like more instructions and definitions that I encourage you read. It's a pretty good manual. Yeah, that basically covers a lot of the same stuff, but in like a slightly different template. And the activity will be just now to fill this out using the example that we had from the first M&E discussion. But so as you can see, like with the theory of change, we already kind of outlined, in a sense, the activities, the outputs, or like initial preconditions, outcomes, and goals of the project. And so here, it's really getting into the nitty-gritty of like, okay, what are the indicators that we are going to associate with each of these things? How do we define that indicator? You want to make sure that everyone is on the same page about what that indicator is and means. So it's good to be really clear about that. You want to get the baseline or current value or status of that indicator, so you know how it's going to change, how to assess change, because that's really what we're trying to see, if there's change or no change, which is still an important thing to know. Okay. The target, so that's kind of associated with the goal. If the goal is a 10% increase, the target is to raise the value or status by 10%. The data method and source, so it's like, how will this indicator be actually measured? Are you going to use a survey? Are you going to use soil test strips? Are you going to use, what are you going to actually use to measure? What's the method or protocol? And where will it come from? So if it's going to be a survey, you could say, okay, we're going to design the survey, and we're going to have it just distributed to a random number of our households. That's the source and method. Source and method kind of go together, so there doesn't have to be a clear distinction if that is onerous, but sometimes they're different. And then there's the inputs needed. So if you're going to do a survey, you need to either have the paper or the tablet or the smartphone or whatever you're using to collect the information. You need to know the number of people that are gonna administer the survey. So it's like, we need a computer and we need maybe like Excel. It's like, it's kind of anything that you can think of as like, these are the things that we need to both administer and analyze this indicator through a survey. You also want to know how frequently you're going to be collecting it. So is this just like a baseline end line thing? Is it going to be like once a month, at the midpoint? How often is this going to be measured? And I think it'll also be good to put in this column like timeline. So you don't just want to know frequency. It's like, okay, once, but like timeline, once at the beginning, once at the end, once in July. Like, it's also good to put in the more specific like timeline of where that falls in. And then you want to define who's responsible. This is one of the things that I think is the downfall of a lot of M&E plans, is that people do a great job of deciding on the indicators that they pick, but then no one really knows who's responsible for them. And so this is really key. Who's going to be responsible for not only measuring it, but then also analyzing it? That is a key thing where, again, in South Africa, I work with an NGO who's putting a lot of effort into trying to measure food security, but they don't really have the capacity to like analyze the information that they're collecting. So is that really useful for them to be doing? And yeah, they didn't really define who was going to do it, so they kind of just took it one step at a time. It was like, let's measure it and figure it out as we go. Just not always the best case. And then also, who will report it? So this could all be the same person. It could be 3 different people. It could be 2 different people. It could be a team of people. But yeah, really defining who's responsible is very important. And then there is reporting. So you're going to collect this information. You're going to analyze this information. How is it going to be reported? Like, is it going to be just like an email that you send to the project lead? Is it going to be reported in some sort of formal report? Are you going to do a presentation? Are you going to report it to the donor? Yeah, how is it getting reported? I would also probably put in here, like, who's it being reported to, and things like that. And then next steps. So you've collected this information, it's been reported, but then what do you do with it afterwards? Like, do you just check a box like, okay, we sent it off? I would say no. You want to be, like I said before and tried to stress, you want this information to be actionable and useful to the project. So you want to say like, okay, like, we reported this information, like, what happens after we do that? Do we say like, okay, we've trained 50, say like for an output, it's train 100, the indicator is number of people trained, the target is to train 100 people, and we do like a midway through like checkup on the number of people that we've trained. We report that number to the project manager, and it's only like 20 people out of the 100, and it's halfway through the project. Like, what are the next steps for that? How do we, what needs to be done? Manager probably needs to say, okay, let's go back and see what's the holdup, or there should be kind of like in this next step, like decision points defined. Like, if this happens, then we'll do this. If we're on track, then like continue as progress, types of things. Ooh. Okay, so now we're gonna move on to this activity. So this is just a refresher of our example from last time, but it's also on the Google Docs. So I'm gonna stop the share, and then so in the Smart site, there should be a link to the Google Doc. I already have it up. So I will share it with you guys. This means that you guys have it on your paper. So although I have a computer here, if either of you wanna like share it. Do you want to share this screen? Yeah. Okay. under the session 7, M&E matrix school doc, if you guys want to use my computer. Okay, can you guys all see this? The Google Doc?
Okay. So are you guys all looking at a Google Doc on the screen right now?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, we can see.
Okay. Actually, I would love it if you guys opened the Google Doc so you can like type in yourself. So there's a link on the Smart site under session 7.
That link doesn't work for me and Brad here in Hawaii.
Oh no.
Uh-oh. Is it
It says I don't have permission.
Okay,
Yeah.
let me
Yeah,
share.
it's only for you can do anyone can.
I'm having the same issue from here.
Oh, anyone?
Yeah,
at
we'll
UC
switch
Davis.
the
Anyone?
more, and then anyone who has the link can do it.
Anyone with link. Okay. Try again.
We just switched the.
I just switched it, so
permissions.
maybe like 1 minute.
Works.
Okay.
It worked?
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Now I see you guys as like little animals.
Yeah.
Which is one thing I like about Google Docs.
Oh, I guess.
Okay, now it works for us too.
It works for me as well.
Okay, perfect.
I'll see it. Okay.
So yeah, so let's kind of just start with the goal. The goal is to increase resilience, both in terms of income, food security, and nutritional status for smallholder tomato farmers in Burkina Faso. So there are tons of indicators that we could choose, but maybe let's just kind of brainstorm 2 or 3 and kind of fill out a line of this together. So anyone can like type in anything and also talk to the group as well. But you know, just have to type.
Yeah.
Okay, so next.
The chupacabras.
Cool. Okay. So, so who's the chupacabra?
I read that as Tia.
Yeah. Elyssa is actually Zach and Nick.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, okay. So we have income. So I would say that, so the indicator, again, is not the target. It is oftentimes difficult to get confused between the target and the indicator, but for both of these examples, the indicator itself would be income, not like the change, or that's going to be in the column that goes with the target, where instead of 20% less losses, it would just be like percentage of losses. Does that make sense? And then that 20 would go in the target. You would want 20% like decrease in losses, tomato losses.
So percent income increase.
Yeah, you could do percent income increases.
Okay.
Or you could just be broad and just say like income, we're just going to measure income, and then the target is to see like a 10% increase or something.
So then resilience then would be like decreased likelihood of like trying to get a loan, or decreased likelihood of borrowing money from friends, like what I guess resilience was.
So yeah, it depends on how you define resilience, which is why this definition column is really important. But yeah, if you say an indicator of resilience is having to borrow less money, the indicator would be like number of times, maybe like within a year, like people have had to like borrow money from a loan shark or something like that.
Okay.
Or you could say an indicator of resilience. I mean, you could, again, food security is a hard thing to measure, but food security as an indicator could be an indicator of resilience, which is what they have defined in their goal. They want to see increased resilience in terms of income, food security, and nutritional status. So you could try and measure food security directly. There are some tools out there that could potentially be applicable depending on the project. It could just be simple number of you could try and measure dietary diversity as an indicator of food security. So that's kind of getting at the access, like how much access to food on a continual basis do they have. And you could have a goal of it being for this case, it's we want people to have access to tomatoes kind of year round is the goal, or more than they have now. So the indicator could be amount of tomatoes consumed, or number of months where tomatoes are available on the market, type of thing. Or it could be cost of tomatoes, and you could see if they're affordable. So the indicator is cost tomatoes, and you want tomatoes to become more affordable for people to purchase, if that is what you're trying to aim to change. In this case, it's probably not that they want tomatoes to become cheaper. They probably want tomatoes to be a higher price so the farmers can get more money from them. But that is the various definitions. So I'm going to say let's go forward with income. So how would you define or calculate income? And I would also say for this one, I'm going to change it to just income, and then we'll say over here, increase in income of, 10% is a lot. I'm going to say 5% over 2 years. It's also really good to define the time frame in which you want to see this change happen. Because if you just want to see a 5% increase in incomes, but it's over the next 100 years, that is maybe not such a useful target to be setting. Okay, so income is our indicator. How are we going to define income?
Amount of rich.
So I would say this definition is probably more so the method of how you're going to measure income. But the definition of income could be something like dollars per household, or you could use a proxy indicator of pounds of tomatoes sold, and kind of use then a conversion ratio of we know a pound of tomatoes is worth this much, so we can say if they sell this many pounds of tomatoes, then their income from tomatoes is this. Does that make sense? So then this ratio of income before and after would be more of our method of assessing change in income. So for this exercise, how do we want to define income?
They could be self-reported by the farmers, or like if it was in the US, we could look at their tax returns or something.
Yeah, so I mean, so that would be, again, like the data source. So it could be like tax returns. This is Burkina Faso, so maybe not tax returns. As
Self-reported.
I don't know about Burkina Faso. But it could be like, yeah, self-reported survey. Self-reported survey. You could also say like from head of household, or from, like, you might want to define like who's being surveyed in this section. So it could be like self-reported from,
Who's ever in charge of finances?
yeah, from like head of household, let's just say. Oftentimes when you ask questions about like nutritional status or like dietary diversity, those are things that you're going to want to ask the person that prepares the food in the household, because they know what they're making and have a better sense than the person who's not making the food or responsible for purchasing the food in the household. And so, yeah. Move this over here. I'm going to define income as the yeah, like money received. Sorry. From tomatoes per season. Does that definition make sense? Does anyone think it should be something else? Money.
Well, per season, where is Burkina Faso? Is it a tropical place? Or
I think it is more tropical, although I know that some of the regions that USAID is working in this project are considered part of the Sahel, so it's a more dry, arid climate.
Because in Hawaii, we grow tomatoes 365 days a year, but if we're looking at 2 years, like that could be like 10 crops or.
No, yeah, exactly. So I would definitely say, if I had more information, I think currently there's just one season of tomatoes in Burkina Faso, which is typically, I think, from like, I think they plant them in around now, and harvest in, yeah. I think it's like, the season is kind of like late February to maybe like April, like not a very long season. So actually one of the things that this project is trying to do is test different varieties to see if, both for post-harvest quality and to see if they could like extend the growing season. But yeah, in general, I would say definitely be as specific as you can. So if it's, if like in Hawaii, the season lasts 365 days a year, you could say, instead of per season, you could say from tomatoes like per year, or you could, yeah, however you want to define it, be as specific as you can. Okay, so I'm not going to pretend that I know the baseline for tomatoes, but this is something that you would want to get from probably the survey that we decided that we were going to do. This is our target. What are the things that you think we need to collect this information?
Self-reported responses, but no, I wouldn't do that.
Like, is this gonna be a paper survey, an electronic survey? How many people are gonna be administering this survey?
How much money and time do you have?
Yeah, like how much money is it gonna cost? Like, yeah, how much time is it gonna take? Time is definitely an input.
Could you just put resources, ...
Just all the things. It is good to just like outline what it is that you need. This is also a really important thing for budgeting.
Yeah.
Which is, so your programs have already like have a budget that they define, and so they likely did not include a lot of these things in there, but maybe they did. And it's something to like discuss with them of like, you can basically like your job with this kind of tool that I've given you right now is to maybe like brainstorm some things and then present them to the organization and see what they think, which ones are useful, which ones are feasible, which ones are they interested in collecting, which ones do they think like beneficiaries would be willing to respond to, because again, food security is a very sensitive topic. So it could be like a really great indicator in theory, but then if people aren't going to respond to your survey because they think that question is too intrusive, then it's not going to be a good tool to be using. So we're getting like a little lower on time. So I'm going to speed through, but frequency, like how often do you think you'd want to measure income?
After every season?
Okay.
Yeah.
So after every season, and then we could say, I'm just guessing right now, but it's like, so this would be like 2 times in like May of 2017 and 2018. And then who's going to be responsible? So this is a conversation to have with your organizations of who's going to be responsible for collecting this information, because it's most likely not going to be you since you are only there for 2 weeks. And so you also really want to make sure that whoever is collecting this information has buy-in, because if they don't see the value in collecting this information, then you're not going to get good quality data if you get data at all. And so yeah, you really want to make sure to engage the people that are collecting this information and make sure that they are equally on board with how you're defining it, how you think that you're going to be collecting it. And so yeah, so they know it's going to be, and know how it's going to be analyzed and used, so they see the value in it. Yeah, and then reporting, how's it going to be reported? Is this something that you're going to report to the donor? Is this something you're going to report to the head of the project? Is this something you're going to maybe report back to your beneficiaries? Because some of this information could be really useful to them. You could say like, we like told you that this was going to increase your incomes, and look, this is like, we've measured this, and this is how much on average incomes have increased. Like your income has increased as much. This could be a really like useful piece of information for them. Or I mean, maybe it hasn't increased their incomes, and that's also something that you would maybe want to discuss with them more about, like why, like questions around why, or also like, oh, we thought this was going to help, but it ended up not helping. Like maybe stop doing this. Yeah, so defining on who you're reporting it to, and then next steps. So next steps for these like larger long-term goals are a little more vague and hard to define because oftentimes they're farther in the future. But the next step could be to like go back and meet with the beneficiaries of the program and hold a focus group to like plan like a follow-up project or how to like keep the sustainability of this project going without funds, and things like that. Or you could say next steps are like, wow, like this was an amazing project. It increased incomes even more than we thought it would. Let's share this information with other like partners in the region that are doing similar things. Let's share this with USAID and try and get like a little blog published so like more people in other places know like how great this initiative was, so maybe that they can try it out where they're working on it and see if it works for them as well. So that could be like a next step for the information. It doesn't always need to be directly actionable for your project. You could also try and like pay it forward. Share the information with other people. I would say things that don't work are equally as important to share so that people don't repeat your mistakes, which is often the case with a lot of things where people just don't. There's a tendency to only want to report on the things that go really well, which kind of like leads to no one really knowing what doesn't work and people repeating the same mistakes over and over again. So yeah, I would encourage people to also report on failures. Yeah. So does this table make sense to everyone? Do people feel like they could maybe like fill it out? I would say what's probably more useful for your project is not to necessarily fill out these big goal level or like longer term outcome level indicators, because again, these are like 6-month projects, and they have like relatively limited resources. So measuring income or yield or nutritional status are oftentimes like really time consuming and difficult indicators to collect. And so, I mean, maybe the organization that you're working with already does do this for their other projects or for their program as a whole. So you could talk to them and put them in this table, but I would focus probably more on measuring or like coming up with indicators for like the activities and outputs that are more tangible and directly related to the activity that you'll be involved in. And then you guys, being remote, can also think about these indicators as a way of like checking in and keeping updated on how the project's going. So you know, like when you go there, where in the project you're at in terms of like, I don't know, if they do have a training target, how many people have been trained? Are you there at the very beginning and you're like initiating the trainings with them? Are you there kind of midway through? They've already done a bunch of trainings, or maybe they have some feedback and changes that they think they want to incorporate. And it could be, yeah, a way of you just like keeping track from afar where you're at in the project. So quickly, before I finally wrap up, I also want to share with you the attachment H that I mentioned. This is the report that we have them there, that we're going to have them fill out at the very end. So again, we have them find the goal and a little summary, and then did the project involve research or field testing of technologies? This is an indicator that USAID has, and I also put on the Smart site the Future Indicator Manual for USAID. This is kind of more just for your reference, but there's like hundreds of indicators, and they all have definitions and methods for collecting them. So it could be really interesting to look through. And so one of the indicators that they have is like technologies that are like in phases of development. So it could be like technologies like under field testing or technologies able to be disseminated as a result of USAID money, basically. So that's kind of like where this question fits into those larger questions that USAID has us report on. And then there's questions about technology adoption, like number of technologies adopted as a result of USAID intervention. And then they also delineate those technologies by kind of type. So there's like ones that improve resiliency, or like ones that, there's like a whole long list of different like ways that they delineate the different technologies that you can look through. Yeah, so under research or field testing, the ones that are how many farmers were directly engaged, again delineated by gender. Questions about how the information is transferred, so extension trainings or workshop, one-on-one meetings, farmers adopting technologies, how did farmers participate. This attachment H is like a little bit of a mix of USAID indicators that they're asking of the Horticulture Innovation Lab to report, and questions that we think are interesting and important for us to like improve and like evaluate the success of these projects and provide potentially information for future projects on how they can improve their dissemination of information or and things like that. So yeah, you can peruse this. Oh, I have a comment. I think this might be a slightly older draft than the one that was actually given to them. You can see my comments on this. This questionnaire, which I adapted from a previous one. I think had some like a bunch of questions that were kind of legacy questions that we didn't end up doing anything with. And so I think we cut them. I think the ones that have comments on this draft ended up getting cut. And so that's an example of like adapting your reporting tools to make sure that the information that you're collecting is useful. Yeah, so any questions? We're just about out of time. So that M&E matrix is something that we ideally would like to see. Not necessarily as like a judgment thing of like, this is a great M&E matrix, this is a terrible one, but more so we could provide feedback to you and your organizations on it. So any questions about that? The time frame on those is, I would say, maybe sooner rather than later, but it's going to depend on where you are in your project, how like communicative your organizations are. So I am hesitant to set like a firm deadline on like, we want to see M&E plans by this time, but I want to say maybe by May, if that's possible. I know some of you are planning to travel like well before then, so this could be something that you talk about in country also. But if they're already getting started on activities, it's a good idea to like make sure that they're collecting information or plan to collect the information before the activities start. So definitely something to talk about sooner rather than later. Yeah. Cool. Okay. just about 1:30, so I'm gonna sign off. Does anyone have any general questions? No?
I have a general question.
Oh yeah.
How long does it take to get an email back based on the pre-travel approval form?
So we have some issues in our office at the moment, which means, and we also have our annual meeting coming up on like March 2nd through the 8th. So people are going to be pretty swamped in our office for a while. So I apologize just in general if you aren't going to get responses back super soon. But so Beatrice has gone through some family tragedies recently, so she's not really in the office that much right now. So I will consult with Beth and see what the plan should be for your travel, given that she is less available, and get back to you guys. This is again why we have you ideally send us things 6 weeks in advance, so there's plenty of time to accommodate for these sorts of challenges. So I know that you, Timothy, sent your travel approval forms really recently.
Yeah, on Friday.
On Friday, yeah. So I will talk to Beth and probably get back to you this coming Friday.
All right. Okay.
With next steps.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.